Hello. So in today's video, we're going to talk about attachment theory. And attachment theory is very important for any form of healing, for any form of self-awareness, self-understanding, and also therefore self-leadership. And how do we lead ourselves in life with as much capacity, awareness, and wholeness really that is available to us in each moment, which will be different in each moment. And attachment theory can really help us understand our first relationships in life. So the relationships that we have with our primary caregivers, in particular, we tend to orientate towards one caregiver the most, which tends to be the mother, but doesn't have to be. Yeah. So really the relationship that we have with our first primary caregivers really determines the quality of our lives in a massive, massive way. And also the quality of relationships in romantic relationships, and then of course in business and in friendships and in all sorts of relationships. So how do we relate to our parents really determines how we relate to pretty much everyone in the world. So you see displayed here, you see the 4 different attachment styles. And I really want to speak into that. This is incredibly nuanced. So you see 4 styles, and generally speaking, yeah. So we're going to go from secure to anxious to avoidant and to fearful. So generally speaking, most people have a secure attachment style, but tend to have some level of either anxious or avoidant in there as well. That is about 50 to 60% of the planet sits in that category at the moment worldwide. Then there is about 20% that is more in the avoidant attachment style, and there's about 25% that sits more in the anxious attachment style, and then there's about 5% that really sits in that fearful attachment style. As you can see, it sits on a spectrum, so that's why these arrows are really important here. And it's very much possible that you're, for example, 90% operating in secure attachment style, but you have some tendency of either anxious or avoidant. Or you might recognize that you're more operating in a fearful attachment style. Before I'm really going to go into this, I really want to pre-frame that we're touching on something quite sensitive here. So we're really touching on how we really orientate to the world from a primary lens. Yeah, so how safe do we feel in the world? And as we explore this topic, it can sometimes happen that shame starts to arise, or sense of not feeling good enough, or a sense of fear, even a sense of, oh, this is really confronting, this information. So as we walk through this, I really invite you into take a breath before we go further. So right now, let's take a breath together. And just ask your system, are you really ready to receive this today? So take a moment to feel into that. And it's going to be either a really clear yes or a clear no. Yeah. If it's a no or a maybe not, just pause the video for now. You can always come back to it until it's actually yes. If it is a yes, let's continue. So, and just continue on with a level of compassion and just softness. Yeah, level of softness. All right. Playfulness. We're going to bring all of the 15 commitments into play here as well as we go through this. So none of this is too serious. We're just really collecting data and information about ourselves, which is really quite useful. So in this attachment, so here we're going to go into secure first. So secure attachment tends to be where we have a positive model of ourselves. So we're quite positive about what we can and can't do. We have a positive view of ourselves. We feel quite confident and calm and able to meet life's circumstances quite easily. So low anxiety. Yeah. So we kind of feel like relatively grounded and stable in ourselves. Positive model of ourselves. In the secure attachment style, we also have a positive model of others. Yeah, what this means is that we have a really good view of other people's. We tend to really see the good in other people. Yeah, very simply put. So we might see behaviors and things that we don't necessarily like, but we overall we have a good discernment capacity, and we tend to see the good in people in most cases, which means there's low avoidance. Yeah, so we don't tend to avoid relationships over certain people. Now, as we then move more to the anxious attachment style, which is demonstrated here, and you can see beautifully in the image as well. So the anxious attachment style tends to have a negative model of self. So they tend to have a quite negative view of themselves. And this can really manifest itself quite subtly. So just little ideas around oneself. I'm not capable, I'm not able, I'm not good enough. And it's really important to note, actually, that even in the secure attachment style, those kind of thoughts can happen. Yeah, it's relatively normal, even though it's more just common. And therefore, we can say it's normal for most human beings to have a sense of doubt about oneself now and then. Yeah, like we can say that's pretty healthy and normal for every human. With the anxious attachment style, it's almost like a consistent idea of oneself of not feeling good enough and having a negative view of oneself, which leads to high anxiety, needing to prove oneself, overworking a lot, etc., etc. And in this anxious attachment category also sits a positive, but it sits a positive model of others. So in this anxious attachment style, you can see almost the dissonance between a negative model of self and a positive model of others. So this person tends to put other people on a pedestal and tends to see other people as more capable, more valuable, more resilient, more beautiful, more whatever it might be, smart. Yeah. So all of these qualities tend to be projected outward rather than a healthy sense of I can do this and I feel kind of smart in life. And I also see the good qualities in others, which is more of a secure view. Yeah. So what this means is there's low avoidance again. So positive model of others means the anxious attachment style tends to actually be quite almost wants to merge with others to the point where they lose their sense of self because they have a negative model of themselves and they tend to not really want to feel that. So they want to feel and merge with others a lot, particularly in romantic relationships. So let's go to the avoidant attachment style. So we go from here to here. So with an avoidant attachment style, there tends to be a positive model of self, which means there's low anxiety, generally speaking. So the avoidant attachment self tends to have quite a positive model of themselves. So they have confidence, they have natural sense of security within themselves, a sense of I can do this, a positive view of oneself. What comes with that also is they tend to have a negative model of others, which means they tend to avoid other people. Yeah, that's why it's called the avoidance. They tend to put themselves above others. And this can be slightly so, this can be massively so. Yeah. So they tend to have a better view of themselves than of others, which leads that they think they know better. They think they have a more truthful perspective on life. They think they have more capacity to get things done than others, which tends to lead to them withdrawing. Yeah. And this is very unconscious. If we go into more of the unconscious, we'll actually find out that the avoidant has a quite a low self-worth. And the anxious actually wants more autonomy, even though they tend to, in their behavior, cling more. Yeah, so it's kind of this paradox. It's very interesting. So on the surface level, it almost shows the exact opposite as to what's going on underneath in the more unconscious layers of the psyche and also the body. The anxious parenting, we will go into that later, what the parenting style is and so on. So then we go to the fearful. So the fearful attachment style is only about 5% of the planet, maybe less so, because it's really about really quite high levels of abuse in the family and from a very, very, very young age. So they tend to have a negative model of self, so high anxiety, and also a negative model of others, high avoidance, which leads to this sense of basically constant distress and feeling of unsafety pretty much on a constant basis, which can lead to all sorts of things like alcoholism, drug addictions, suicide, depression. Like we're really talking about the more extremes here. Most people won't really fall into this category, but you might have some parts of you that are in this category, right? So this is why it's not black and white. You might notice yourself being more avoidant or more anxious, and this is very much what Dan and I are exploring in our relationship as well. So it's really alive for me right now in our life as we explore these more deeper childhood experiences. So here we see an example of how do we relate to our parents with these different attachment styles. So in a secure attachment style, the child becomes distressed when the parent leaves, but is easily comforted when the parent returns. Yeah, so there's a healthy, secure attachment bond there. In the anxious attachment style, the child is distressed when the parent leaves and seeks to punish the parent by displaying overt feelings such as anger towards the parent. Yeah, so that's their way of dealing with stress, by expressing anger. The avoidant attachment style, the child is not distressed when the parent leaves and ignores the parent when they return. This is the child's covert way of managing their anxiety. In the disorganized attachment style, the child does not have a predictable pattern of attachment. So it's just chaotic. Yeah, it's not very predictable. It includes child who displays signs of this depression and disturbing behavior. So really, this is really where we see, yeah, this is really more in the really abusive families and so on. So what most of you will probably find is some level of secure, some level of avoidance, some level of anxious, and maybe some of you will find yourself here. And if that's the case, I'd love to have a chat with you, because that'd be really beautiful to hear how that is and how we can support that as well. So it's really important to note that these early attachment styles get formed really, really early in childhood, like literally from the age of 0, if not already prenatal, but if we go by birth, age of 0 to in about the first year or two, that's where the basic foundation of this gets developed and laid down. So what are some of the traits that we can recognize in these different attachment styles? So the secure attachment style tends to behave in ways that are warm and caring, trusting and forgiving, with good, healthy boundaries. They manage their emotions well, they're responsive to others, and they're honest and open. Yeah. The avoidant attachment, sorry, we're going to go this way. The anxious attachment style tends to have relationship insecurities. In other words, they fear abandonment. Yeah, there we go. They fear abandonment. They tend to have not so great boundaries, lack of boundaries, because they want to merge with the other, remember? So they don't have really good boundaries. Their mood can really fluctuate. The reason for this is because they want to merge with the other. And if the other has an emotional experience, just some stress or something happens, which is of course very likely because we're all human and that can happen, the anxious attachment style tends to really feel that. So the anxious attachment style has a very sensitive nervous system, and they really experience the emotions of other people on really heightened levels, which can be really difficult. So their mood is fluctuating in that way as well. So they're highly sensitive and overly accommodating, almost people-pleasing sometimes. Yeah. The avoidant attachment style has a fear of closeness and true intimacy. It can be distant and withdrawing, can avoid conflict, so not speak up, because they're kind of like, I'll deal with it myself here, kind of on the inside. I won't really need to share that with other people. Extreme independence, so kind of this real strong stance of I can do it alone by myself. So where the secure attachment style has a really healthy balance between independence and also dependency, which means we're interdependent, whilst the anxious attachment style can be more codependent. But what can happen, and this is what you very often see, almost 80% of relationships are made up with people that are somewhat avoidant and anxious. And that means that there's very interesting relationship dynamics that happen where there's a codependency that starts to develop. So one sense of control, security, and approval, like we mentioned in 15 commitment, comes through the other person. And that's a codependency, and that tends to not be very healthy in the sense of like it will just create a lot of conflict. Anyway, we'll come back to the avoidant attachment style. So they tend to be more unresponsive to the partner and more logical. So it's kind of where the anxious attachment style is really more based on their feelings and how do they feel in a particular situation. The avoidant tends to be a bit more logical. Well, I don't really understand what you mean because X, Y, Z. So it's very logical. It's more in the head. And then we've got the disorganized, fearful attachment style. So that means they're unable to self-regulate, find intimacy and trust difficult, tendency to disassociate, a lack of empathy, and wants closeness, but is also fearful of others. So there's these are some of the signs that we can really recognize if this gets displaced most of the time. Sometimes we're not able to self-regulate, even as a secure person. Yeah, and that's relatively normal. It's just what is happening most of the time. That's kind of what we want to look at. And also this lack of empathy is really important to really recognize this more disorganized, fearful attachment style, because they can't really, they're so closed off from their environment that they can't really be empathetic towards others and their experiences. So here's some more prompts that will help us understand these different attachment styles. So again, we're just going to walk through them. There's a lot of text here, so just follow me. So again, the secure attachment style is the connected explorer. And it's kind of really beautifully put in these two words, because connected means they want to connect and want to be close, but they're also exploring the world. Yeah. So they're kind of open to new experiences. They like to have some variety in their life. But they also simultaneously still want to stay connected. Yeah. So that's very much a sign of the secure attachment style. They have a resilient self-concept. So they tend to overcome difficulties relatively easily and also have to believe in themselves that they can. They have a positive view of others, comfortable with intimacy, functions autonomously, yeah, so independently in a healthy way, discusses feelings openly, trust others with their needs, seek social support when needed. So they both function autonomously, but they also seek social support when they need it, which means interdependence. And they value self as it is, yeah? So they kind of have just this really stable view of themselves. I'm good as I am, you are good as you are, and here we are together, yeah? The anxious attachment style, so the worried warrior, that's what it's called. They have a fragile self-concept. They idolize others, overly crave intimacy, but there's a nuance to be brought into this, because they overly want to be together and merge, but they're actually on a deeper level also afraid of true intimacy, because true intimacy means that I can be in myself and meet the other in that. If I'm just merged with the other because I don't want to feel myself, basically, that's not intimacy, if we look at the true meaning of intimacy. But here the point is more that they overly crave that sense of closeness and being in the others, almost being in the other space, rather than just healthily also being in their own center. They feel anxious when alone. They overshare their feelings. They're suspicious of others. It's a very, very important sign of the anxious attachment style, because they have learned in childhood to, the parent didn't respond that well to the anxious attachment style, in the sense of the parent was sometimes responsive and sometimes not. That means that the anxious attachment style develops this capacity where they almost can read, they almost become a bit overly suspicious, and they really read the room and look for signs if they're safe or not. Yeah, so a bit of suspicion. Even though they do idolize others, but they're also suspicious, which is an interesting parable. They fear losing support. So this anxious attachment style often has a wound of abandonment, a strong wound of abandonment, or a lesser strong wound of abandonment, but there is some abandonment that has happened in their life. They fear losing support, they're clingy and on separation, and they need all its validation. Yeah. Avoidant, the fiercely independent, performative self-concept. Yeah, so very performative self-concept, negative view of others, avoids true intimacy, extremely self-reliant, removes self from conflict, dislikes relying on others. So they remove themselves from conflict, yeah? So they don't want to deal with the conflict. They're like, I don't want to deal with this. This dislikes relying on others, solves problems on their own, prone to isolation, values self when achieving. Sorry, that's, yeah. So when you value self when they're achieving. So those are some signs of the avoidant attachment style. And again, to remind you, you can be, let's say, 80% in the secure and then 20% of one or the other. Yeah, that's actually very common. About 9 out of 10 people is actually like that. It's very rare that someone is like completely secure. Yeah. Then it is organized attachment style again. So the surveillance specialists. So these people are very, very good at scanning the environment, overly so, to detect danger ultimately, right? Because they've been raised in a very hostile environment often. So their brain is completely wired to scan for danger. They have a fluctuating self-concept that can either be really, really highly valuing of oneself or really not at all, like so real self-doubt, and quite extremes. That's what we want to see. Of course, it's normal to sometimes feel good and sometimes feel not so good. That's relatively normal for the secure attachments. But this is like, we want to look at the extremes, the level of extremity that's there. And then again, idealizes or devalues others. So there's just this constant sort of chaos going on. Yeah, that's the best way to describe it. Fearful of intimacy, acts out when alone, starts conflict as a test, seeks and avoids others. So again, you see that real chaotic sort of way of relating. Distrust own decisions, strongly fears rejection, situation self-valuing. Yeah, so these are some of the ways that we can recognize attachment style. And really the most important thing in the path of healing, which I will go through in a bit, is that we recognize where are we at? How are we relating to ourselves and other people? That's and just be really honest, lovingly honest with yourself. Yeah. And we're also here, both Dan and myself are here to support you through that if you have something coming up in response to it. So the path of healing towards a more secure attachment style really goes to both being able to self-regulate and then also co-regulate, because that's really the sign of a secure attachment style. Someone that is really quite comfortable in their own self-regulation and feel really solid and comfortable in themselves. Even when there's challenges in life, even when there's discomfort in some way, they just feel like they have a resilient self-concept, and so they feel like they can handle it. And how can we practice self-regulation? Through journaling, meditation, going for a walk or swim, and just this sense of, I've got this, you've got this. Yeah. So really practicing self-regulation can also be through your own breathwork practices, or just anything that helps you relax and be in your own space of self-regulation. You can really practice this on a day-to-day level by simply 5 minutes of self-regulation. Yeah, really coming back to yourself. Then also we want to lean into co-regulation. So practice sharing your feelings with loved ones with the intention for deeper intimacy and closeness. And this is a lot of co-regulation tends to happen in a lot of coaching or therapy relationships, which is a lot. But this is why the relationship with the therapist is probably the most important thing. It's because there's a lot of co-regulation that happens in the space. So as a leader as well, if you work with your team or your family members, the way you are and the way you are in your own self-regulated self will largely determine how you can regulate with other people and how you can co-regulate with them, even without them knowing. Your nervous system, they will mirror your nervous system automatically. Yeah. So co-regulation. Yeah. So and what this means is really going to someone that you really want to be close with and also are quite close with, that is not your therapist or coach, but someone in your day life that could be your mom, your sister, your brother, your partner, and share something that's vulnerable with them with the intention to deeper intimacy and closeness. Yeah. So again, secure attachments is a warmth and loving comes naturally, and they're able to be intimate without worrying about the relationship or little misunderstandings. You accept your partner's minor shortcomings and treat them and him or her with love and respect. You don't play games or manipulate, but are direct and able to openly and assertively share your wins and losses, needs and feelings. You are also responsive to those of your partner, as in their feelings and their needs, and try to meet your partner's needs. Because you have a good self-esteem, you don't take things personally and aren't reactive to criticism. Thus, you don't become defensive in conflict. Instead, you de-escalate them by problem solving, forgiving, and apologizing. These are just some of the ways that you can really recognize what does a secure attachment actually look and feel like. The more you can be aware of that, the more you can go towards the path of healing. And remember, we're all somewhere on this path of healing. And the way we really heal this basic relationship with our parents and our caregivers will massively influence all areas of your life, and also your capacity for both self-leadership and then leadership in your businesses, in your families, anywhere where you show up. Enjoy. And thank you.